Welcome to The Thing About Austen, a podcast about Jane Austen's world. I'm Zan.
And I'm Diane. And this episode, we're talking about Mollands. This episode is focused on persuasion and has us headed back to Bath. At this point in the novel, Anne is in Bath, Admiral and Mrs. Croft are in Bath, Mr. Elliot is in Bath, everyone is in Bath. Spoiler alert, Captain Wentworth has also just arrived in Bath.
Ooh.
Anne is out with Mr. Elliot, her sister, and Mrs. Clay when it begins to rain.
So here is our scene. Mr. Elliot was attending his two cousins and Mrs. Clay. They were in Milsom Street. It began to rain. Not much, but enough to make shelter desirable for women, and quite enough to make it very desirable for Miss Elliot to have the advantage of being conveyed home in Lady Dalrymple's carriage, which was seen waiting at a little distance. She, Anne, and Mrs. Clay, therefore, turned into Mollands, while Mr. Elliot stepped to Lady Dalrymple to request her assistance. She's like, "Oh, there's the carriage. The rain is way too wet. I must be waiting."
It's giving real Mrs. Bennet making Jane, take the horse to Netherfield Park kind of vibes.
Definitely. Absolutely.
How can I turn this weather to my advantage? So Molland's was a confectionery shop located at number 2 Milsom Street in Bath. It was owned by Nicholas Peter Molland, a French cook from Brighton, who actually first established the shop in Northgate Street. But in 1781, after only 2 years at the Northgate address, Molland's moved to Milsom Street, and this was prime real estate.
Definitely. So for context, Milsom Street was the main shopping thoroughfare in Bath. The street and its 3-story terrace houses were initially intended as residential properties when plans for the construction began in 1761. But less than a decade after construction was completed, in 1768, fashionable shops were already open, such as the shop for Josiah Wedgwood's China, which was opened in 1773.
By the time Molland and his wife Dorothy set up shop in Milsom Street, the thoroughfare was an established shopping destination for luxury goods. So Molland's was ideally situated to accommodate fashionable society while they did their shopping. And apparently the Mollands took full advantage of the fact that they had the wealthy crowd hooked. According to Bath Commercialized Shops, Trades and Market at the 18th Century Spa by Trevor Fawcett, Molland's was, quote, expensive but alluring, which made it a constant rendezvous for those who could afford it.
Mm-hmm. Fancy.
Mm-hmm.
During its heyday, Molland's was an incredibly popular location. Janet Todd, in Jane Austen in Context, points out that it was so well known that Austen didn't even bother telling her readers that this was a confectionery shop. She just assumes everybody knows about Molland's.
Molland's was also notable for not just having a shop front for their confectionery, but also for having proper dining space for patrons. In another work by Fawcett titled Bath Entertained, he writes that there are several accounts of prominent persons in Bath dining at Molland's, including John Wilkes, a famous politician of the day, and Mr. King, the master of ceremonies at the lower rooms.
I mean, if Mr. King is there,
Obviously, come on.
it is a place to be.
Catherine Morland's favorite person,
Yeah, the matchmaker extraordinaire. Fawcett also notes that there was, quote, a room large enough to be hired for private dances and suppers, as we know from a party enjoyed by about 15 couples early in 1793 and mentioned in a letter by one satisfied participant named Elizabeth Canning.
So Molland's was a place to see and be seen on Milsom Street, which really does come into play in Persuasion, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Everyone's getting very excited.
But before we go there, we have to, there's a few more details about Molland's that are of interest. For example, the sign for Molland's was a rooster, which was a bit unorthodox for a sweet shop.
According to the Bath directories of the period, Dorothy Molland took over the business in 1805. It's not entirely clear why, but most likely because Nicholas passed away. In 1819, Molland's likely closed since it no longer appears in the directories.
So, as we kind of hinted before, Molland's wasn't the only confectionery game in town. In fact, some thought that Bath was, quote, the great nursery of culinary talent, according to Fawcett. And even though there were plenty of confectionery options, Molland's stands out amongst the crowd, along with their confectionery competition, Gill's.
Charles Gill was the pastry cook for his shops. His first shop opened in Bath in 1756. His second shop opened in 1772 and was located in Wade's Passage, which was close to the Abbey Church. Fawcett describes Gill's shop under the sign of the Pheasant, with its, quote, mouth-watering display window that fronted the busy pedestrian passage between Abbey Churchyard and Orange Grove.
So this was a solid location, though this shop didn't have the same amount of dining space as Molland's. In the 1780s, after Gill's death, the business was run by others, so when Molland's opened in Milsom Street in 1781, the shops were still in competition, but it wasn't a direct head-to-head. This wasn't Gill versus Molland.
It wasn't like a great personal rivalry or anything.
Yes, yeah, there was no smackdown kind of.
Both shops were massively popular and even immortalized in poetry. So we'll start by giving you just a small sample of poetry devoted to the perfection that is Gill's.
This is from the author, Christopher Ansey, who titled his poem, Song, a Charge to the Poets, written at Mr. Gill's, an eminent cook at Bath. So, get a couple of stanzas here. Ye bards who sing the hero's praise, or lasses of the mill, a loftier theme invites your lays. Come tune your lyres to Gill. Of all the cooks the world can boast, however great their skill, to bake or fry, to boil or roast, there's none like Master Gill. So he continues in this vein for 11 stanzas, describing his favorite dishes, etc. And so finally he concludes with this last stanza. Your bard has lived at Bath so long, he dreads to see your bill. Instead of cash, accept this song, my worthy Master Gill. I love it so much, but also I can't pay the bill. I doubt that Gill took this as an acceptable form of payment. But again, Gill lives on forever because of this bardic moment.
So while Molland's apparently does not merit an entire ode in its praise, though it does get a mention by Austin, which in the long run really is the better option, in our opinion.
It's, we're biased, but also,
The shop does show up in a poem by John Cam Hobhouse, Lord Broughton. He writes a scene in which a young man is touring Bath, and his characterization of the shop is really a rebuttal or comparison to Ansey's verse. He writes, "A crony of mine takes his stand at the door of the temple that's kept by Molland. Immortal Molland, as immortal as Gill, were I like our Ansey on Helicon's hill." People just had a lot of free time,
Or they just really, really loved confectionery. I
guess.
Which I understand personally. I appreciate any kind of confectionery rivalry. I'm into it personally.
If you own one of these shops, you're for sure printing one of these out and putting it on your
window.
Wall. Yeah, next to the signed portraits of all the celebrities that have been into your establishment.
Your signature wall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's going right up to next to Mr. King's signature.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've given you some kind of specifics of confectionery in Bath, but now we're going to kind of zoom out for a minute to give you a bit more context on confectionery as a trade during this period. Technically, there are differences between the terms pastry cook, confectioner, baker, and several other trades that are related to baking during this period. According to Fawcett, for example, a pastry cook technically specialized in, quote, savory pies and pastries, soups, and cooked meat. Whereas a confectioner, which Fawcett describes as a sweet-toothed tradesman, they would deal in, quote, cakes, candied fruits, creams, and other desserts. However, a lot of the times these distinctions weren't always adhered to, and oftentimes the two were combined under one roof.
Ivan Day, in his essay, The Art of Confectionery, writes that, quote, in the 18th century, the confectioner was the most highly regarded of all tradesmen involved in the preparation of food. His skills were considered to be of a more elevated order than those of a mere cook or baker, and if he was successful in his craft, he could command not only impressive financial rewards, but a respectable social standing usually denied to other food professionals.
So if you were wondering about how much money a confectioner might make during this time, we've got you covered. According to John Stobart, in his book, Sugar and Spice, Grocers and Groceries in Provincial England, 1650 to 1830, in the latter half of the 18th century, a confectioner would make an average annual income of £119, although it could range from £80 to £150. The initial setup cost to start a confectionery ranged from £100 to £300, with an additional cost of £10 to £40 for apprentices.
Day goes on to explain, quote, "Some confectioners found employment in the households of the aristocracy. Others ran their own shops in the cities and large towns and sold a remarkable variety of sweetmeats, biscuits, and ices, as well as the elaborate table furnishings necessary for the lavish entertainments of the Rococo age."
Mm-hmm.
So now we're going to turn our attention to how Molland is contextualized in Austen's novel. As we've mentioned, Molland's was definitely a space to see and be seen. And we get a sense of this when Mr. Elliot returns to the shop and we get this description. "It was beginning to rain again, and altogether there was a delay, and a bustle, and a talking, which must make all the little crowd in the shop understand that Lady Dalrymple was calling to convey Miss Elliot."
So in the scene, there's the little crowd that takes note of everything that's happening here. It's also just accurate to the Elliot characterizations that they would want to have their names bandied about in a fashionable shop like this.
Another detail about the shop that is really important to how this whole scene plays out is that this is not only a place to see and be seen, but that the windows of the shop play an important role in this part of the plot. Because this is when Anne has her Wentworth sighting.
Mm-hmm.
Anne, as she sat near the window, descried most decidedly and distinctly Captain Wentworth walking down the street.
She's like, I must follow up on this.
I know the description of her being like, "Oh, I just need to check and see if it's still raining. I'm just going to kind of like, oh."
I shouldn't suspect myself of anything else.
Yeah, it's great.
But the fact that she has the sighting through the window, this, we need to talk about this a little bit more, right? So Molland's had six-paned sash windows at the front of the shop, according to the Historic England Archive. And in the late 18th century, large windows for shops were a relatively new phenomenon, since flat-paned glass was finally really becoming more affordable and widely available. And we do talk more about that in our episode on Sir Walter's mirrors.
According to Stobart, quote, "Unsurprisingly, large windows became synonymous with shops, even after building regulations restricted their encroachment onto the thoroughfare, with the archetypal modern shop of late Georgian England comprising a double front of bow windows and a central door, which was also often glazed. This made the display of goods in the window still more important in communicating the nature of the retail business and the kind of stock being carried."
So yeah, your windows become, part of your advertising very clearly. So this is what leads Fawcett to conclude that, quote, "The confectioner's window displays can have been no less seductive with their piled-up cakes and sweetmeats and pyramids of fruit." He continues, quote, "The description of a London confectioner's in 1786 tells of glass display cases, preserved fruits and jellies in handsome jars, pyramids of pastries and tartlets, libbed goblets of liqueurs, and transparent gauze to keep off the flies. Bath, famous for its show, can have offered no less."
So while there are these big window displays showing off all the lovely confections available at Molland's, they are also what makes it so easy for Anne to spot Wentworth as he passes. It's also likely a part of the reason he doesn't see her. She's got candy camouflage, so when he does come into the shop, he's surprised to meet her.
Yeah, she's not surprised to see him, but he's like, "Oh, hey, I did not see you amongst the pastries." So another reason that Austen might have chosen Molland's for the site of this important exchange between Anne and Wentworth is that confections were considered an important and appropriate courtship gift. And dining in a confectionery was also one of the few places that men and women could sit alone together in public without people giving them side-eye if they didn't have a chaperone.
Sally Holloway, a previous guest on our show, has written about the role that confectionery played in courtship in her article, The Foods of Love: Food Gifts, Courtship, and Emotions in Long 18th Century England. She explains that, quote, the offer of sugared delicacies could provide men with a valuable avenue for developing greater familiarity with women by treating them and engaging in flirtation and conversation.
So when Wentworth encounters Anne in Molland's, it's possible that there are already several courting couples hanging out in the shop.
Love is in the air.
Yes, absolutely. And it initially seems like a really serendipitous place for them to have this kind of like meet cute moment, right?
Yeah. This is a spot for romance.
Yeah.
At the same time, when Mr. Elliot shows up to escort Anne home, Wentworth very easily and understandably reads their presence there as a sign of courtship between the two. And so do the other people that he's with. So this is from the text. Mr. Elliot does not dislike his cousin, I fancy. Oh no, that is clear enough. One can guess what will happen there. He is always with them. Half lives in the family, I believe. What a very good-looking man.
Oh, Wentworth is just sitting there like, this is not great,
Yeah.
So he has this great big window shop where you can just watch her walk off with a guy that she's been hanging out with at a confectionery shop while everyone agrees that, yeah, those two, totally a couple.
Poor Wentworth, like, sad trombone. We thought the umbrella made this a sad moment, but now he's also got this whole sweet shop ambiance to contend with. It's like it's just making it all even worse. It's like you just want to be like kind of sad and you're surrounded by candy colors and everyone having a great time and
all the other cute couples in the shop. And you're just like, really? The layers of angst that this man is experiencing. So I think that this is where it's worth mentioning how this shows up in some of the adaptations. So in the 1995 film adaptation, they really do this scene justice, particularly with the windows and the shop displays. So we have that moment where we actually do see Wentworth literally through the window, and that Anne is like, did I just see that? But you're also seeing the fact that there are the displays in the window. So I think this one does a really good job of conveying that idea of the window shops being important. On the flip side, in the 2022 Persuasion, they also do this scene at Molland's in a really interesting way, but they do it where they're actually at the counter, and so the confections themselves are getting some quality screen time. Like you really do get a sense of how many options would be in this shop. So I do appreciate that both of these adaptations really do try to do justice to the fact that this is like the confectionery shop to be hanging out at.
Right. It's a hot spot in town, basically.
Yeah, and it really does like again, it's all about vibes, right? If you're gonna do a scene in a pastry shop, like really do the vibes right. And those two really particularly choose maybe different emphases, but in ways that still convey largely what it would be like to be at Molland's.
Well, if you have any thoughts on Molland's, which also, side note, we do have a full episode on Wentworth and his umbrella, if you are wondering why we didn't go into that in more detail in this episode. You can find us on Instagram at @thethingaboutAusten and on Twitter at Austen_things. You can also check out our website, thethingaboutausten.com, and email us at thethingaboutausten@gmail.com. You can also check out our merch for the podcast on Redbubble. Go to aboutausten.redbubble.com.
And stay tuned for next episode when we'll be talking about the bell pull at Northanger Abbey.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.